So I'll start the recording now. And welcome everyone to another Ask Professionals, OZeWAI Ask Professionals. Very excited about this one. I'd like to say thank you to Ricky, who also helped round up a few of our panelists for this event, which is really cool. So my name's Bree Norton. I'm just going to do an acknowledgement of country and a little bit about OZeWAI. So I would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm meeting today in Canberra, and pay respects to the elders of the Ngunnawal Nation, both past and present. And I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander peoples in attendance today. And if you feel free to, in the chat, put your name and maybe your role and where you pay your respects to today, that would be great. And as we go through our session today, please put any questions in the chat. We will be moderating the questions. We've got a few to get us started. But we also do love to see all the questions that come in the chat, because this is why we're here, to learn from these wonderful professionals with us today. OZeWAI used to be an annual conference. We're now a professional organisation in Australia. Our Ask Professionals are just growing and growing and growing. We now have it set up as a member free. If you join as a member, any member, even our $50 advocacy member, any member, you get free access to all the Ask Professionals. You just get a code and you can register. And I've been hugely impressed with the number of our members that have taken that on board, but also the ones who are paying for our session today. Really appreciate it. Thank you. That will go towards any support that we need to put together for these events now, which could be sign language or interpreters or anything like that. And also, if you'd like, please join OZeWAI. You're very welcome anywhere around the world. You can join as low as $50 Australian, and then you will get a year's worth of the Ask Professionals access for free, and also access, as we said, to the area to go and look at the recordings afterwards. And that helps us support our community, and we really appreciate it. I'm going to pass it over to Amanda, and then I'll do a little bit of a summary at the end about our next Ask the Professionals and what we're looking forward to for this year. Over to you, Amanda. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Bree. So I have to admit, I'm incredibly excited about this particular panel and this particular topic. I'm all about rinse and repeat, and design systems are about making sure you rinse and repeat and do good accessibility from the very beginning. So I think the way that we'll start is, I suppose I should do a bit of an intro of myself. So Amanda Mace, I am the co-chair alongside Bree of OZeWAI, and have been a member of OZeWAI and part of the committee somewhere near a decade. I don't know the exact number, but for a very long time. And I've always enjoyed my time on the committee. And my role today really is just to help facilitate the conversation between our three fabulous guests. So that's my job. Ross, why don't I pass it on to you? Can you give us a bit of an intro, who you are, where you come from, some of your passions around design systems and pattern libraries?
Thanks, Amanda. Hi, everyone. I'm Ross. I'm from Canberra, Ngunnawal country, and I've been in accessibility now for about 17 years, and I think almost as long as an OZeWAI member as well. Why did I join accessibility? I guess initially I viewed it from that a technical aspect of wanting to be good at something, and then the more work I did in it, the more I found it was a real niche, which was underserved. All of the existing organisations were focused on compliance only. And I thought, with a developer background, I might be able to do something differently. So initially my passion was technical only, but then I understand that there's a whole new accessibility world out there, and I just find it's that the thirst of wanting to do more and learn more.
Amazing. Hidde, I think you're joining us from outside Australia, is that right? Can you give us a bit of an intro to what you're doing in your day today, which looks very exciting?
Definitely, yeah. I'm joining from Rotterdam in the Netherlands, so just on the other end of the globe. And I am an accessibility front-end and design system specialist. I like kind of these three areas of the web. I got sort of into design systems because I was doing accessibility work and found that, in audit reports, assessments, I was writing down the same kind of things very often. And I felt like there should be ways to make it easier for people to understand, like, at least these basics. So we should be able to kind of put them into a system for people to more easily copy paste. So I've been really fascinated with how can we sort of build in accessibility into systems that make it easier to repeat the stuff that we've learned along the way, because a lot of the things that I've been teaching people, I feel like they are not that hard. We can kind of put them into a system and make it sort of easier to find. And then the kind of hard stuff is also awesome to put into design systems because it's hard, and it's also great if you can kind of learn from best practices that others have defined. And I kind of feel like design systems can uh, fill the gap between standards on the one hand and kind of building web products on the other hand, because standards can be quite abstract, and design systems can be that kind of level of concrete solutions that make it more clear what people are actually supposed to do. So yeah, love design systems, and for me, they're kind of a way to accelerate accessibility in the organizations that I work for.
Awesome. Thank you. Adam, you have been living and breathing design systems, haven't you? So I think we probably only know each other really by name back and forth in W3C. So it's actually fantastic to get to see you on the call. But tell us a bit about your passion around design systems, making them accessible, how you ended up doing what you're doing.
Yep, sure. So yeah, hello everyone, I'm Adam. I've been involved in design systems and accessibility for probably around 15 years. So I've got the grey hairs to prove it. And yeah, back then, design systems weren't really coined design systems back then. They were, called many a thing. But yeah, my first experience was leading a UI team to deliver an internet banking solution in web and native mobile. So yeah, from that journey, we created a few of us created a startup product called Parsley, which was essentially binding design systems, or the creation of a design system with workflow. So, and that was, the intention of that was to help organizations deliver products that were accessible, like visually correct and consistent. So yeah, that was back then. Parsley has sort of pivoted a bit and changed what it is. But yeah, for me personally, like I guess many of us have had the need to pay a mortgage. So I've been leading design system and accessibility initiatives through a few organisations in Australia, Westpac, Macquarie, Newbook, and Department of Communities and Justice. And I guess across all of those, it's a consistent space for me. And it's, yeah, I think as just mentioned, it's solving the same problems multiple times. So, if you get it right in design systems from the get-go, then that can manifest out to various products, and you're driving consistency and I guess accessibility right from the start.
So Adam, I want to pick up on just a little bit of that right there. So one of the things that oftentimes, and I imagine people in the room right now can speak about horror stories of trying to get people onboarded for accessibility, get them on board, have the little, the light go off like, oh yes, we need to do this and it's a good idea. Do design systems help with that, do you think, by being able to introduce it through almost UX? Like, hey, if we do this UI component like this every time, it's going to have some consistency and be accessible.
Yeah, it simplifies the process right from the get-go. And I guess, yeah, this is something I deal quite often with across multiple product teams, that new people join, and it's the first port of call, rather than taking them into designs, is to show them the design system and the consistent components and patterns and the foundations of that, and how they drive all the different products within a system, within an organization.
When you get started putting together a design system, what are the things that you need to know? What's sort of your checklist at that very start of, oh no, time to go again? What do we start with?
Wow, that's it's a big question. Maybe I can answer it for one of the projects I was involved with. That is NL design system. So that's a project within the Dutch government where we're trying to make the best components across government. Because we have a lot of governmental organizations and they all build their own design systems. Well, not all of them, but we've got maybe 20 to 30, maybe even 100 different design systems within the government, counting like different cities, provinces, national government, all of that. So one of the things that we started with there was to figure out which are the components that are most needed, and also what are the components that have a proven value that we are sure that are going to improve the end user experience. So that was a way that we tried to figure out kind of how do we choose what to work on. And within that process, we also decided not to do certain components because there was no one with a need for them. So we didn't want to kind of push from top down to say we need these components, but we kind of started with, yeah, these are actually needed in actual websites that we know of that are going to be used. So maybe that's one way to approach that. Just on a component level, and then on kind of there are different parts to like guidelines and documentation that require their own processes, of course.
Of course. Is there a concern ever about the system getting too big? Can there be too much? So you just said you kind of have to prioritize, but once you start building out, can it get too big?
I feel like it can. But it depends on the kind of skill that it's used on as well. Because sometimes it can make sense to make more components or like make it bigger so that each individual part is simpler to understand. But yeah, it can definitely be too big. I've seen examples of that where it's just really hard to find kind of what you need because you have a lot of things that are very similar. And some things are in there just because of the one use case somewhere. We actually call those snowflakes in the project that I worked on. Like they are only there for one specific need. We didn't need to put them in a design system.
That's a great example. Ross, I'm curious about your experience with some of the organizations and companies that you've worked with design systems. So the key to a design system is obviously it delivers consistency, the way something looks, the way something's coded. Have you seen that go really wrong? So design systems in place and no one uses it, or design systems in place and it's just really poorly done. Have you seen it go wrong?
I do, and it's a contentious subject because I understand the design system teams who've put a lot of emphasis into building it out. But one of the most obvious examples was the Australian government design system, where it had this lofty aim of being used over every single government website and app. But what we found more and more is it had a very complicated build to process. It favoured one language only, which meant that if other departments were writing a .NET or Angular or Blazor or any other language other than React, which is what the design system was built in, it would be very hard to adopt. And what we found more and more time was focused on implementing a system to make accessible components, but actually neglecting the component side. So a lot of development work on build tools and make it run, and it was able to build foundational HTML elements wonderfully well, but it had difficulty with anything a little more complex because it was a very complex system. It worked ever so well, but it needed a lot of maintenance and a lot of overhead, which meant if there was a very limited team, and at that time it was about 4 or 5 members working on it, it meant that most of our time was spent on fixing it and updating it and updating its dependencies, rather than leveraging what we really wanted, which was making up regular and useful web components. So whilst it was a very novel product and it was engineered well, it seemed to be focusing on the engineering side of making it run effortlessly and making it run well, but neglecting the actual aim, which was producing a web artifact regularly and consistently. So that's what we found. It was engineered well, but it wasn't really addressing what the need was.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Adam, is there anything you can expand on that about sort of good intentions? And sometimes, let's be honest, that was it good intentions are a path to hell or something along those lines? Like, are good intentions good enough? I'm sure we all know the answer, good intentions is not always good enough. But where have you seen this go wrong as well in your area where complexity hasn't been taken into account? It's like haven't taken into account the ecosystem that they're working within?
I've worked at a few banks, so yes. It's amazing the number of products and technologies that are in play at banks. So there is no one design system to rule them all, I suppose. And as in, something that has components that can be used by every product within the organization. So I've experienced before, products with React, Angular, Salesforce, web components, custom builds. So there's those sort of things. I guess you don't want those products to miss out on the goodness of what's coming from a design system, but they obviously can't absorb or consume the, let's say React component in Angular or whatever. So, taking what they can and working with the design system teams to align as much as possible and feel a part of that family is something to strive for. But yeah, it's difficult in large, complex organizations.
So, and actually, I'll get all three of you to answer this to make sure we cover it, but I'll start with you, Adam. Who needs to be brought into that conversation? So you go, yes, design system's the way to go. Who needs to be brought in as a stakeholder? Marketing, branding, who needs to be in the conversation? And who hinders the conversation is probably the better question. Who needs to be brought in and who hinders it?
So you hit one nail on the head, brand, and I've worked in a few places where brand are very strong with how they want their assets to be positioned across the bank or the organisation. But yeah, that's the challenge, that you need your technical teams at the right level, the design teams. Legal often like to have a say. It's a bit of a frustration at times. And like I think from the strategy side as well, there's a lot of players in the game, and it's often hard to come to a decision and come up with something to forge ahead with. Everyone has opinions on the right way to do things, and it takes a lot of time.
So Ross, same question to you. If I'm developing a responsibility chart around this, who am I not including? Who am I going, look, they're an informed person, they don't need to be accountable for this?
A difficult question, because on the one hand, having more disciplines involved in the design process will lead to a much better outcome. But it's a balancing that discipline with their level of knowledge and expertise. Because one thing I found in the past was in this organization I worked for, everyone knew and valued accessibility, which was absolutely wonderful. But then everyone had a slightly different in interpretation of what a guideline meant. So often it was a butting up where people's opinions were overruling accepted wisdom. And often, if they were at a level above me, it would be hard to convince them otherwise that no, the approach they're looking at is wrong. So as much as I would like to exclude individuals from the decision-making process, I realise that there's wisdom in greater numbers. But where that starts to break down is if that wisdom is from leadership, then they have a different perspective, which may not always be in the weeds technical. So I don't want to necessarily neglect anyone, but it's more about tailoring a message or reducing a senior leadership's influence. So allowing more junior team members to put views forward rather than accepting the view of the highest paid person in the organisation.
I love that. That's a great answer. Hidde, I'm curious from your perspective, because you work a lot, obviously, with the Dutch government. You're involved really heavily in standards and kind of getting web technology standards up and running, including through W3C. When we're having these discussions, and I, personally, I know from within W3C, we can get very down into the nitty and gritty. But when you're having these discussions with stakeholders, it's a little bit different. And I was just thinking actually about a talk that I'm giving at the Perth Web Accessibility Camp around action plans and governance and leadership support. And one of the things that just keeps coming back around leadership support is that there's a knowledge gap. And leadership wants to, so I'll give an example of what I'm talking about. If we talk about PDF accessibility, people want to apply WCAG to it. And actually what you're applying to it is WCAG to ICT, which is a group note. Now, unless you're actually really heavily involved in W3C, you probably don't know the difference. But there are laws across the world who actually reference WCAG for documents when document has its own technical specification. The guidelines is more of an advisory note from W3C because it's not web content, it's PDF. So how do we, I guess, bridge that gap for leadership, because we need the support, but not have the hindrance that Ross so very eloquently actually put to us, is that it can sometimes be the wrong voice in the room.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it applies to apps as well. Like they apply WCAG to apps, and you get a similar problem, right? That doesn't really apply to it because it ain't web content. Yeah, that is definitely a problem. Um, I think one of the things that we did in our team is to actually have comms people within the design system team, because the design system team were all kind of experts. They knew really well on their subject matter. So that's accessibility experts, but also the code experts, developers. And to have a comms person actually explain it better to the leadership has helped quite a lot to make sure they understand it the right way. Because one thing that we found was that they would understand it the wrong way, right? They would think, oh, this is great. This is going to solve all accessibility problems everywhere forever. So we'll just finish this project at the end of December, and then next year we won't have any inaccessible websites. And it's really important to have the comms in place to make sure that there's nuance and people understand kind of what exactly this design system is going to deliver. So maybe that's another kind of addition to that, Racy, maybe have comms people also involved with kind of how do we explain this to leadership, not just as this is very beneficial, but also as be careful, it's not going to do maybe the things that pop into your mind right now that you hope will happen when you use this design system.
That's amazing advice. I would say that's the advice of the year, but we're only in January. That's the advice of the last 18 months, everyone. That's a great idea. Having comms people, using them to help get your message across in the way you need to. That's a great idea. Take notes, people. That's awesome. Hidde, we did have a couple of questions, and I just out of the chat, and I want to get to them before we get into the conversation, because there's some really good ones in here. One of them is around the intersection of branding, so our branding and marketing teams, logos, that sort of thing, and accessibility. Do design systems make it easier, harder, or no impact? So Hidde, I'm going to start with you, just because you gave us that wonderful golden nugget of advice, so you get to start. Does it have an impact? Oh, you're muted. We've all done it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think you get more leverage when you're on a design system team sometimes, because people think you're going to deliver the next like big thing, so they might listen to you more. And then it could be a place where, yeah, you can actually influence branding. We've got this big bank, speaking of banks in the Netherlands, that has a orange logo, and we all know about orange and contrast and stuff. So their design system team actually managed to change the main brand color to be a little bit darker so that they could meet the WCAG. I think that kind of thing can happen with design systems because you're more able to kind of show what the impact is, and maybe you'll have some like accessibility tests in your design system, and you can make it really clear to management like this is going wrong. We'll need to change this. So yeah, I think they can impact it to make the conversation easier, and also to kind of get the permission arranged in one place as well. So if you got permission to change the color and you do it in the design system, then everyone else can say, well, it's in the design system, so we can do it too. So I think, yeah, it can definitely impact.
Adam, have you seen design systems be that opportunity for change?
Yes. I guess talking about the whole brand aspect there, and that it's often a negotiation, right? So I can think of a few years ago working on with brand and a marketing department and a few other parts of the bank, and I guess representing accessibility myself, but also design systems, that we all had different ideas on how some of the, I guess, the key colors of the design system foundations were meant to be. And yeah, working through with everyone sort of, I guess, led to the right path in the end. But from my perspective, there was a lot of challenge on the dull, darker colors for some of the colors that was coming up with it, obviously contrast compliant, and yeah, having decent strength that they would work on darker backgrounds and that sort of thing, or, you know, like shaded backgrounds. And yeah, coming from, I guess, the marketing and brand sides was they want vibrance and dynamic colors. So I'd probably say that was a 6-month process to sort of work away at, you know, getting that right color set. But then that's basically become the color set for how the organization uses color like throughout. So it was a good outcome in the end, and, you know, brought everyone together. And that was, yeah, by way of the foundational colors of the design system.
It's really good when you get like branding on board and you're like, it's not that you can't use this color, we're just gonna use it a little differently. I've had that experience very similar with the orange and white, Hidde, so I totally understand that challenge. I've been there, and it's exciting when you're able to get that change, like whether they change the whole color or they find another way to use that color. It's exciting. Ross, you've worked with a couple of brands, really well-known name brands as well, that have potential for color issues and branding to be used in ways that are not accessible. When it comes to design systems and kind of building those big components, that's one thing. But what about the smaller components, the ones that people are like, well, you know, paint the town orange and white? How do you address that as a consultant coming into an organization?
It's interesting because on one hand, the teams are receptive to your advice, except of course when it then touches into the UX. And I've often found there's a pushback where up to a certain point, everyone is on board with making accessibility real and tangible. But when it begins interfering with layout, the font size, the text placement. That's where the difficulty of, yeah, but is this a best practice, or do we need it? What's the minimum? And so I found most are initially receptive, but when there's those friction points which begin bleeding into another person's discipline, that's where there's often a pushback from the individuals and the discipline saying, this is really, really good, but let's mark this as a nice to have or best or practice. And so there's that expectation of let's make it accessible, but then there's a pushback of, well, that's all well and good, but it's overly affecting our brand, which is often that a pushback. And so more and more, you then need to lean on laws and other mechanisms as a way of motivating them. So initially, there's that attitude of let's make something accessible, but then it starts to become diluted when the difficulties appear.
So that actually leads directly into the comment here from Andrew, which says, we haven't talked about involving users. I am not going to call them pesky end users, but our end users. So once we have these great design systems, they get put in place. Technically, maybe they're accessible from a expert, WCAG point of view, maybe even they're accessible. What about the end user? So Adam, for you, when do you bring the end user into that discussion? Recognizing that you might be hindered by the organization you're working with at the time, I understand that. But when would you?
Yeah, it's hard, I guess, within the organization, unless you've got internal users or access to, I guess, a range of users, I guess, that are essentially staff. I guess in terms of testing, it's like from a user testing point of view, it's often hard to, I guess you can accessibility test quite quickly, but it's often hard to user test design system components. So quite often, I guess you're waiting for the consuming products to build out pages and page flows and features, whatever, that you'd be testing and bringing real users in to validate, I guess, a lot of those design system elements.
So I know from a recent experience with a client of mine that they brought in end users, but no one with any lived experience with disability. Is that a problem that you've run into where you've kind of had to push back and been like, this isn't the, there's no average user, I guess, and we need to be a bit more diverse? Is that something that you've found even at government level?
Yeah, though at government, I was lucky that kind of user testing is a component of like how people work in a lot of areas. So we often found that we worked with teams that already had their own kind of user testing processes. Sometimes we'd have to nudge them to also include users with disabilities and kind of diversify their group so that they're not just testing with the same people over and over again. But I feel like I had it easier at government because like people understood well that they needed to test with users, and kind of making the case for that was somewhat easier because the goal of the government is to deliver stuff for citizens. Like the relationship with the user is kind of within the whole point of what the government does. At least it should be. Maybe there's political parties that will think about it differently, right? But I think that was relatively easy. And I love it when it happens. When you have user testing with design systems, that's kind of a perfect recipe for good accessibility in your design system because you actually take the opportunity to, once you've standardized kind of how a pattern works, to also make sure that it actually works. So you change kind of how it works to we've actually seen it work with end users in these specific cases. So I think it can make the case for your design system better and maybe get more adoption as well. Like these guys know what they're doing because they've done user testing.
there was another question. I think Bree actually asked it and asked about the public ones. So here in Australia, we've got a couple of agencies, maybe even a couple of companies that have like an open source toolkit or design system that they go, anyone can have a look at this and use it. Certainly W3C does that. Are those of any use? And I'm going to start with Ross and then go to Adam, because I want to hear from a corporate perspective. Are those helpful at all? Or is it just government giving something that may or may not ever be looked at?
This touches on my absolute favourite, the subject of vendors promising the earth. So it's not so much prevalent in government, where locally at least, they often under promise. But what I found commercially, organisations would leverage existing design systems, and so often the vendors of these systems say we are 100% accessible, built to YREO guidelines, and the teams are purchasing it don't do enough a deep dive into making sure all of that is accurate. One obvious example was many moons ago now with a government, where there was this large government application which had to be accessible, and they used an existing component library. The vendors of this library said we are 100% accessible, and the developers assumed it was accurate, implemented it everywhere, on every workflow, every screen, and it was only at the last point, when they were testing with a vision impaired user, did they then find that every single workflow was inaccessible. Even logging on was broken for this blind user, and it was that realization of it's unusable in any way. And I guess that experience has motivated me now to assume anything what a vendor says about their design, a system or component library is wholly inaccurate. So unless it's being proven otherwise, assume that, for want of a better term, it's I wouldn't say a lie, but it's not necessarily accurate. So always assume the worst, test otherwise, and if it's right, wonderful. If it's wrong, then you've saved a massive overhead of implementing everything, and right at the very last point, I think, oh no, every workflow is inaccessible. So I believe the vendor hype to a point, but also make sure you independently verify all of that hype, making sure that what they say is accurate.
A great point. Adam, is it the louder they shout that they're completely compliant, the harder you should look to see if they actually are compliant at all?
Yeah, or how strong the sales pitch is. And yeah, I've experienced this a few times, where often the wrong people are in the room, and there's a lure for, we've got this out of the box system, it's going to do everything that you need, or this out of the box component library that you can customize and build whatever you want. But yeah, I guess the reality is they're very limited in how you can change them. I've seen ones in the past where they have essentially a single design system that's going out to multiple products. So if they make a single change in one product, for you, the customer, then it's going to have an impact across every other customer that they have. So it's basically a no, and you're stuck then. So yeah, I've seen that happen a lot. I've actually been fortunate enough to be included in the process a couple of times, where I've been able to test some of the component libraries and products that some product teams are considering purchasing, and being able to sway people or the teams away from that. So yeah, having the right people in the room makes a huge difference. And I agree with Ross. There's a lot of bad products out there, and so assume it's inaccessible before it is.
Are there names, Hidde, this one's for you. Are there names that people getting them, for example, they say it's accessible, and this can really be any vendor, but governments do it too. Where they say, no, this is accessible because X government does it, or because Apple does it, or Google does it, and of course they're accessible. Have you had that argument? Is that something you get back even in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a wrong understanding of kind of what accessibility is because it is a spectrum. We're working on how people with disabilities can use the web, but disabilities are hugely varied. So there's always going to be some portion of your users that it's going to work well for, and you're trying to make that portion huge, or as big as you can using guidelines. But there's always going to be yeah, it's always going to be a spectrum. So kind of saying that it is a binary thing, like we're 100% accessible, or even the other way around, like some people will say, oh, that product, it's not accessible. It's also not entirely true, right? If it's text-based, there's a lot of people who will be able to access the text, and depending on lots of details, there will be people who experience barriers too. So yeah, it's a spectrum. So the kind of 100%, 0% kind of thing is probably not correct. You're always going to be somewhere on some percentage. We do pretend, though, at the Dutch government that 100% exists. So we have a categorization from A to E, I believe. So A means you meet WCAG, and B means I think you've ordered an audit somewhere, or you've looked at the first audit you've had done, or something like that. So we have like different letters that we assign, a bit like when you buy food and it says how healthy it is. It's going to give you some indication, and it helps us kind of push people to do more accessibility work. But yeah, we should recognize, I guess, that it's never going to be one of those categories. Always going to be somewhere on a much more nuanced spectrum, and that is something that I, as a comms person on our design system team, have always kind of pushed for and explained, like, we're not going to give you 100% accessibility. We're going to help your teams to do the best job that they possibly can, and to interpret the standards for them as good as we can do it.
I think what I love about that is you may have just given a free promo for next month's Ask the Professionals, where we're talking about digital accessibility maturity models. Also from W3C, there's a really good one. But it's exactly true. It's finding it's understanding where you are in that journey and recognizing it's a journey, right? I always find it interesting. And I imagine that you've all experienced this, the lack of understanding between the difference between the guidelines and technical specifications, understanding that one is coding and one is about an end user outcome. Adam, Hidde, you're both W3C people and involved. Is that something you find yourself explaining, that there's a difference between the way something's coded to be accessible and the outcome, the end experience? Adam, let's start with you. You're on mute. It is too slow.
Yeah, I experience, I guess, this every day. So, yeah, and I guess that's part of what, I guess, how I work with design and development teams to deliver the quality. And yeah, like quite often, a lot of the team members have some level of experience of accessibility, but yeah, there's often issues that still remain, or are product owners happy with this, and is this meeting the sprint deadlines and that sort of thing. So yeah, and yeah, I guess the frustration with, at least in my experience with Agile, is once the sprint's done and complete, no one wants to go back and fix things up later on. So if you're not doing it at that particular point, it may well likely not get fixed in the future. So it's best to intercept a lot of that stuff early on, and I guess guide people and show them how to uplift some of the accessibility, because quite often it is lacking.
Awesome. Hidde, I can see that you just shared a blog, of which I am 100% going to read. And we'll make sure that Bree sends that around afterwards as well, because that looks fantastic. There's a couple of really good questions here in the chat, so I want to get to them. One of my favorites, maybe I will start with Ross, is how many components or component variants in a design system is enough? And there's kind of a sub-question to this.
How many is enough? I guess it varies with what the app or the website needs. But if there is an absolute freedom of building more and more complexity, then what we found is there might also be an appetite of leveraging that complexity more and more and building ever more complex composite elements. So in answer, there's no set number, but I would always favour UI elements which are simple. Whilst my developer background is always itching to build something complex and accessible, I realise that is it helping the end user with what they need to do, or is it simply making me feel good? So there's no real set number, but I would caution that if you're a design system has ever more complex elements, numbering in the 30 plus, possibly there's something there where you want to look at, where larger numbers don't necessarily mean better user experiences. If you're able to focus on core elements and only use them where needed, that is always a much better outcome.
How do you manage that? So requests to get various, new variants of a component. How do you manage that so you don't end up with exactly what Ross said, which is, a million variants of one component when you should have just kept it simple?
Yeah, I recognize the tendency. I have a developer background, and yeah, it's a lot of fun to make all these different variants. What we used to do at the NL design system team is just ask what you need it for, and are you sure you can't just do it with this one that already exists? So we wanted to see like user research or like some kind of evidence that it's actually going to change something, and that it is different enough to warrant its own component. And otherwise, we'll put you in the snowflake category that I mentioned earlier. Like then you're more of a one-off type of thing. But yeah, sometimes I see kind of complexity also help with things. I've seen design systems that can like automatically check color contrast when you put in themes and stuff like that. So people can make their own themes and then they can automatically know that their theme is accessible in terms of color contrast. That kind of thing is pretty cool and it can be really helpful. But yeah, requires a really good product manager to make sure we don't do all the things because you can never do all the things, right? You've got to focus and I guess focus on end users and delivering value for them and not like for the developers that just want to have fun in your team.
Can I add to that, Amanda?
Please do.
Yeah, I guess in the way that I work is generally like a design-led approach to design systems. So the first thing is we're asking what problem are we solving, and and I think to Hidde's point, it's what user research is there. Is there something existing, or is there something new that that's going to fulfill this need that we need to produce, and does that belong in the design system, or is that something product specific? And the other thing I was going to say was, yes, you can go crazy variation-wise, but I quite often like having specific components for specific things. So, one component you could cover across 5 different things, but breaking that down into, here's a specific use component for an error summary when in form validation, and that's going to be different to how the page alert works. And then they've got very unique instances on or how they get used, and then you have less variations.
Yeah, so it's a good point because there's sort of a balance there to be had, isn't there? You do need variations. That's a reality. I'm really curious about what kind of tools you use, or maybe you get your teams to use and your champions throughout, to help, I guess, with the management of, making changes, how you might use that component, or take that component for some edge case for this one product that's like a promo and it just needs this one thing and it doesn't quite come straight out of the library. What kind of tools do you send your designers, developers, Adam? Like, what do you head them towards?
I guess my approach to some of these things, and I can maybe talk to tables because this is something I dealt with recently, and the use case was a table that needed 60 columns in it for a certain users needing to look at certain data, and this is their exact user need. But yeah, so we don't want, I guess, a whole bunch of functionality and complexity in components, right? So something like that maybe does need to be specific. It still can leverage off something, a base component that's quite flexible and utilize some of the foundational elements of a design system. Yeah, I don't know if that answers it, but that's, yeah, just, I guess, allowing flexibility and not compounding too much functionality and difference into design systems. So I think a lot can be achieved when they're all quite separate and can fit within each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Ross, you do a bit of training as well. When you're working with design system teams and their stakeholders, and they want to make some sort of exact change, do you send them any resources or tools outside of like, here's a flexible component for you to work with?
Not so much sending them resources, but more having a discussion of is your variance required? As I found that whilst you can send through more and more resources, they're not necessarily answering the why, or they're missing a context. So what I found is having that discussion point is often much richer than just sending them a web page of a variance of an element. It's reinforcing, I guess, that yes, you can have a variant, but do you actually need it? And I guess frustratingly for them, I push back more, saying, well, yes, you can have endless variants, but do you actually need it? And it's dampening down their in enthusiasm, but making them appreciate that by simply having another variant means that you've got more and more overhead. So reducing that footprint of variants mean ultimately that accessibility is maintained rather than just diluted. So I would always caution about just because you can build variants, you don't necessarily need to really unpack why. Is there a real rationale there?
Yeah, is this a conversation that you have as well, where it's like, do you really need that variant? And if you find they do, are there tools that you point to?
Yeah, all the time. I think it's one of just maybe the main balancing act that you have when you're building a design system is, figuring out if the thing is really needed. And I guess it depends on maybe the goal of the design system, which, for me, when I'm involved, it's often to bring accessibility further. Then I want to see that it has benefits for accessibility to do that variant or for usability, and not that it's just some kind of one-off type of thing. But yeah, it's a challenge for sure.
So I'm going to extend that question for you because Tom put in, and he's given a bit of background, I guess, which I think is really important. So his question, and it's kind of a two-parter, is how do you build consensus on a design system without offending designers? And he says, I'm working on aligning a design system across multiple teams, but I want to ensure designers feel heard and don't see it as restrictive. Any tips on balancing standardization with creative freedom?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've seen it a lot. Like the design is too restrictive. And I think one of the ways to balance it is to offer theming, and to offer ways that people can actually put in their own colors or spacing or fonts or things like that. It does add to complexity, so there is something to balance there. Um, but yeah, the design system, like what we had in NL design system, is that we had like 40 different themes, and people can have their own themes. It adds a lot of complexity, but it does make it easier for designers to embrace it because they can kind of keep having their own branding and style in there. Um, that, that is one way. Uh, 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 and the other maybe would be to have components or to decide kind of what the components are that you're going to build, or in like what sort of things are we trying to build with this, and involving them earlier basically, and or making them part of the team. And maybe a third one would be to have regular meetings between the designers that are using the design system and people that are maybe inside of the design system to make sure there's a space where they can come up with ideas or share their needs or things like that. Literally listening to them to make sure that they're heard.
Yeah, Adam, anything to add to that? Because I think this is such a big challenge for so many people,
Mhm.
where you get this idea that accessibility is stifling creativity, because it's a standard, and sometimes it can be inflexible.
So yeah, I was just back on the previous one. I was going to ask if I could
And
contribute
please.
further. So, like on the design front and working with teams of designers, trying to all solve multiple problems, but they've all got their own use case based on whatever their products are doing. Something that's worked well for me previously, and I can talk to one specific example, was on filtering functionality. So it's essentially, it's filtering functionality, but then there's a whole bunch of other sort of working groups that were formed as well. But there was a specific one on filtering functionality that there was, I think, maybe 6 of us that all brought in our designs. We all sort of had this space. So those designers sort of form part of the process so that they were involved early. And then we designed and fleshed out something that was going to be robust, that would fit across everything. So, that actually cut out a lot of uniqueness and I guess bespoke design that was occurring through some of the things. And yeah, I think the end outcome was everyone was on board, and no feelings or no designers were offended by that. So like, I guess working groups involving people early is something that's been successful for me. To your question on accessibility and the challenge of that in design systems, and I guess one of the things that I've tried to do with my own Parsley design system is challenge that idea that accessibility means everything's black and white, and the big buttons, and is super usable, and it's not true. And I look at my color theme that I did, and I'm using pinks, greens, purples, and everything's contrast compliant and works the way that it's meant to. And there is a lot of freedom, and you can push it quite far, as I guess as long as you understand what the requirements are.
So I think probably in recent times, or not so recent, I suppose now, it's probably been out for 8 years, but the Inclusive Design Toolkit from Microsoft really put that on, said restrictions are a beautiful thing. And I still quote that frequently in almost every presentation. Like, restrictions actually allow us to have to think outside the box, to be more creative, to say things like, it's not that you can't use that color, it's how you use it that matters, and then be creative about using that color in different ways. So I'm absolutely with you on there. I think it's really important that the core of what seems to be coming out of this particular question around sort of how do you not offend designers, it's actually about communication and keeping them involved in that conversation. I think Bree has put in, and this is a really interesting, I would be curious on feedback because we've actually tried to do this in Western Australia as well, where government sites, so the UK government website is now being used for all departments or agencies. It's actually not all, but like the large majority. So now individually, they don't have their own brand. And Hidde, I'm going to go to you for this because of your work with the inside government. So this is something Western Australia has actually tried to do. I dare say it hasn't been that successful, to be honest. Not because they didn't try, but because a lot of agencies went, we're an exception. And there was a way to get out of it because they wanted their own branding for various reasons. What do you think about this? Is this an advantage to have like big government agencies have everything under one umbrella, big website?
One thing I'm starting to think is that this depends on the country and maybe the culture within the country. So within the Netherlands, people look at Gov the UK a lot as like this is a great example. But I also feel like the way that hierarchy works and like how people make decisions is very different within the Netherlands compared to the UK and maybe Australia as well. Like I feel like there's different cultures of kind of how people work together. I feel like it's probably impossible in the Netherlands to say from like a minister point of view, you all need to use this style because yeah, Dutch managers will be like, nah, I'm different. I'm gonna do it differently. Which if I understand the British working culture more, I feel like that is not something they would do so easily because maybe they be more recipient to like the what the manager wants. We have a lot of different government websites. We've got like a national central government style that is the most official looking one. But there's also restrictions on who is allowed to use that. So there's a lot of agencies that are sort of national government, but they are not allowed to be on that platform. So they build their own stuff that sometimes looks the same and sometimes doesn't. It might have different URLs. So like there's a lot of sort of different parts of the government, but we've kind of decided to embrace that at the NL design system and just say, well, whatever you need it to look like, let's do it accessibly and let's do it with user research and let's kind of yeah, agree on patterns that work well because they do end up kind of having the same patterns because it's all about interactions with the government. There's going to be a lot of forms. There's going to be a lot of like people need to go through a certain process and yeah, that kind of thing is sort of yeah, easy to standardize or easy. You can standardize it, you can attempt to, and it's a worthwhile effort to do that. But yeah, I think it depends kind of on the culture, how easy it is to have like one central design system, and yeah, it has its upsides and downsides as well, I think.
Adam, do you think this is a winning strategy for government, state or federal here in Australia?
Yeah, I've actually did that recently for a government agency, and I think they had maybe 20 different products with unique themes. So I guess there was the core theme. We had a dark theme, which is another part of design systems and color theming. And then we had some very vibrant and different color themes to, I guess, the core theme. And essentially, I've created a color system that could be replicated across the different products that they had. So it can absolutely work, but yeah, it needs to follow the system and consider accessibility from the get-go. And you know, there's always variations as well, right? So one of those themes that I mentioned that was quite vibrant, yellow was one of the key colors. So you know, that's a challenge in having that as a primary color. So yeah, there was things that needed to be accommodated to sort of fit that yellow and allow that to have presence within the design, but also remain true to, I guess, the rest of the design system and keep that consistency as well.
Ross, have you seen it go wrong with government agencies when they try to bring this one big design system and all the agencies underneath it?
Unfortunately, yeah. The most obvious example was the digital transformation agency, because from what I understand, it implemented a lot of the ideas from what the UK UK government did. So have a central agency coordinating everything, and having a minister who is very vocal about embedding a consistent look, a consistent feel, and a consistent architecture. Well, in Australia, it seems that mindset just wasn't there. Individual departments were quite hesitant to embrace that radical new approach. And often, whilst they were open to the conversations, it felt very much like this a central agency coordinating it were on an island amongst themselves, are pushing out these bold ideas, but not necessarily winning over other departments in a way which would encourage that reciprocal feedback. So the bold aim was replicating what the UK government did, but then locally and federally, maybe it wasn't the right time, the right appetite, but there is an attitude here of wanting to protect your turf more. So rather than giving up all of the branding, all of the digital assets, all of the architecture planning, and making government apps and websites easy and consistent, it only felt like, at best, tokenistic. Make it look a bit more themable, but overwhelmingly, government websites and apps did their own thing. They would dial in when they needed a bit more expertise, but often it was having to build that relationship where initially, and most of these departments didn't want to engage just centrally, which meant it was very hard to get a buy-in. So building those relationships rather than just bashing down walls, they're saying you will build things this way. It was very challenging.
Yeah, and I think my personal opinion is that's pretty much what happened in WA when the West Australian government tried to do it. Is there were some that were like, cool, we don't have to worry about that website thing that we've been trying to keep up to date. But there was a very big portion, especially the bigger agencies, that were like, we need an exception. We've put time and resources in. They have multiple assets that they're in charge of. They have multiple teams. They're in charge of those assets, and the look and feel and the brand that they have been building and is familiar to the community, they felt was a significant enough hurdle. And oftentimes, in truth, they got the exception. That's true now. But also, I think what's interesting about this idea that the UK government has gone with is that they almost want that website to be used like a Google. You do your searching for government services inside of that website. And I think people probably just don't work that way in Australia. They'll just Google it and they'll go to the right website that shows up. So it's been an interesting experiment, one that started pre-COVID as well. It's certainly here in WA. I think we were probably working on this somewhere around 2018. So pre-COVID, we were looking at this. Have seen some successes in it though. And so if we look, I live in Perth, so I can't help it. I'll use WA as an example. During COVID, there was a WA government app that you needed to show your certificate of being vaccinated. They've turned that into a whole sort of services app now that allows you to sort of, and we're seeing some of this at federal level around government, like around IDing for directors and things like that. Is there a place for it, Ross, after saying all of that? Is there a place for some centralization around design and repeated systems like this?
There is, yeah, because ultimately, rather than reinvent the wheel every time, just use something which is already there. But ultimately, people's egos are coming to play. So looking at something which is already been built, it might be, I like this, but I need it to do that. Let's do that. And then there's that a divergent approach of initially liking everything and now thinking, oh, I need to build variants or I need to build different things. So overwhelmingly, the idea of a design system to harmonize the look and the feel and the functionality is a brilliant thing. But often where it breaks down is in its implementation. So much like what Adam and Hidde you touched on earlier, it's bringing people along rather than enforcing an approach. And I find that that a softly approach of bringing people on the journey of adopting something which is easy and consistent means that more people will readily adopt it and use it, as opposed to saying, we've built this, now you need to use it. So overwhelmingly in everything, communication is the absolute key. A design system can help a lot, but ultimately it falls apart if there's poor communication about how to use it, how to contribute, how to adopt it.
I want to, I guess, ask what good examples look like. So, Hidde, maybe I'll start with you. What makes for a good design system?
There's lots of kind of different design systems that do things well. When it comes to accessibility, I'm always really inspired with what they do at the US government, because they explain with different components how they test them and what you need to do to test it yourself in your own environment. And I really love the kind of level of nuance they bring there. So it helps with what we were talking about earlier, like it's not going to be 100% accessible. You need to do some of your own work as well when you use a component. I like what they're doing there. So basically, they say, here's a button. We've tested these different things for it, and they relate to these WCAG criteria. But also, if you're implementing it, you still need to verify yourself that X, Y, and Z are also the case. So this really helps people to make sure they know that they're doing it well. That's one of the things, I guess, when teams consume a component that I've heard people feel unsure about. Like, oh, I'm using your design system. I hope I've done it well. And if you kind of give them some acceptance criteria and explain what using it well looks like, that can go a long way and really help with accessibility. So yeah, US web design system is a great example that does that. GovUK design system has been mentioned, or at least the GovUK website. The design system that powers that also has really good guidance and user research that backs up the stuff that they're claiming you should do. So I always look at that as well as an inspiration. But yeah, I'm very much in the government design system space, I guess. Like there's a lot of commercial design systems as well, and are great examples. One thing that people could look at if they're not familiar with it is there is a component or design system matrix on the website of OpenUI, which is a community group at the W3C that I'm involved with. And on that, we compare different design systems, and there's a lot of different ones there that have really good examples of how to implement specific components. So that has lots of examples.
Very cool.
I'll share a link in the chat.
Adam, what do you think makes for a good design system?
I can rattle off a few and why. So as Hidde said, UK government, yeah, I really appreciate the level of user testing that goes into everything they do there. It's I think they're at the forefront of that. From a banking side, Westpac Gel, that's a design system that's pretty much been ahead of its time. It's been around for a long time and was doing a lot of good stuff a long time ago. I saw Bree put in the comments the agriculture design system. I think that's fantastic. That's an excellent design system. And the thing that I like about their design system is their products look like their design system. So For me, I generally steer away from the big names out there, because I quite often find that their design systems don't look like the products that they actually provide to people. So I think that's a key metric for me on what a good design system is. That all that hard work that's gone into a design system, and the user research, I want to see customers using that and getting the consistency benefits and the accessibility and all the rest of it, because it's been applied through multiple products and pages. I was going to say Seek. I think their design system is quite good. It connects design and development quite well. And I can't help myself but say my design system. And like I say that only because it's like I've applied a design-led approach to that, and it's I guess the problem that I was trying to solve is to make it as scalable and accessible as possible. So it's sort of constructed in that way.
Ross, for you, what makes a good design system?
I guess it's making sure it's easy to use and easy to adopt. If there's a friction point in any of those aspects, it means its use wouldn't be as well used. But I would like to see more documentation of how accessibility has been addressed. So rather than focusing on how the components have been built, a little bit of a detail about how everything's been tested. What tests did they use? Did it pass? Did it fail? What's the roadmap for fixing things? So understanding what part of accessibility has been tested. Has it been tested with real users with real disabilities? Those are some other things which aren't often there, but I'd like to see adding more of that background information about what accessibility has been applied.
No, that's really good. But we have a few minutes, and then I have to hand over to Bree so she can get us all excited for next month's Ask the Professionals. But I thought what we would end on is just 1 minute from each of you, really just asking, what can OZeWAI do? So OZeWAI, obviously, we are full of other professionals like ourselves who are in the accessibility industry, people who are championing it, advocates, people who are just interested and want to help spread the message. So we'll go backwards. So I'll do Ross, Adam, and then Hidde. Ross, what can OZeWAI do to help support using and starting accessible design systems?
For me, I'd like to hear more diverse voices from engineering teams and designers. So more voices of individuals and disciplines who contribute to design systems, and as well as sharing resources, sharing a bit more context. What's the opinion of this resource? Is it useful? Is it a good or bad? Because what I've often found in the past, the sharing of resources in organisations is really good, but it seems to lack the context. Why is it relevant? Why is it important? What are some things you need to look out for? So resources and also appropriate context.
Awesome. Adam, for you, what can we do to help make design systems accessible?
I think a repository of robust examples and having edge cases, and there's a lot of design systems or components and whatnot out there that solve the happy paths, and like in accessibility there's so many edge cases to things. So conveying what some of those edge cases are and how to solve it when things don't go right in that perfect component way, and I like what Ross said about bringing users into it as well, and having that sort of help drive the outcomes.
Hidde, you get the last word today. What can OZeWAI do and OZeWAI members do to help support accessible design systems?
Yeah, I agree with everything Ross and Adam said, like robust components we need to involve end users. I guess I'm gonna end with comms. Make sure you explain well what your design system can do and what it cannot do to have realistic expectations. Yeah, that will kind of in the long run lead to more success. So make sure you communicate about the yeah what your design system can actually achieve.
But I have to admit, I have copious amounts of notes as you guys have been talking. There are URLs that are as long as my arm that Bree is going to have to send out via email because they're just so good, and I won't get a chance to click on all of them before the meeting ends. But thank you so much. All three of you have just imparted so much knowledge. I appreciate your time. I know that everyone in the chat here has been pounding out the questions. I think we got to all of them, which may be a first. I think I was more quiet than I normally am. So there we go. It does happen, Bree. I can shut up, I promise. Thank you, Adam, Hidde, Ross. Amazing to have your insights on this. And Bree, over to you. You are muted, Bree. I don't know what's happening. And give that another go. Or I'll make the announcement if she can't.
Trying again.
There we go.
I think my headphones timed out. Oh, am I back?
Yes, you're back. You're good.
Excellent. Look,
so much. And as Ricky said, hey lekker. That's a small amount of Dutch, I know. So, which is very nice. Very well done. Really, really amazing conversations. Lots of great links. We'll be sharing a lot of those. There's also so the February session we have, 14th February, please register, is about the accessibility maturity model. And look, I just can't thank you enough for how much you've shared today. And can I just say that the people that are registered today, this has been probably one of the best registrations since we changed to our paid model, if you can call it that. We've had more people join because they're paid in the aspect of things. So we got up to 23 people. We had 32, I think, register. So they will still get a link. They're very lucky to get that. But please join OZeWAI because we have so many other wonderful topics to bring you this year. But thank you to these amazing panelists. Thank you, Amanda, for all this, the wonderful questions. I hope you didn't mind that I threw in there a few to just check in on your interest. Also, being involved in the design system before Ross did at DTA. I do love seeing how it's worked out for Department of Agriculture. And yeah, no, it's been really, really wonderful. And I really appreciate your time. And please share with your colleagues and anyone else that you think that we should have on one of our panelists in the future. We've put in our last newsletter what our proposed topics are. We have some responses to our surveys about topics that are now up to 250 responses on what our topics should be. It's growing. We are not light on here. We need some help. So please, panelists, people on the call, if you know of anyone that's doing something pretty amazing in the accessibility space, share with us so we can make sure that they're on a panel in the future. And thank you again, Amanda, for your wonderful moderation, and for everyone else on the call to ask your questions. Great questions, and yeah, share with people what OZeWAI is doing at the moment. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.